Okay. There I am. Good afternoon. I am calling the study session meeting of April 23rd, 2025 to order. And City Clerk, will you please take the roll call for us?
Councilmember Carnevale?
Here.
Councilmember Lamb? Here. Councilmember Gutierrez?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregory?
Here.
Mayor Ross?
Here. Next, we have agenda finalization. Are there any changes? I'm looking over at you, Mr.
I have no changes to the study session.
Thank you. Then public comment. City Clerk, will you please read the statement of participation?
Public comment is the opportunity for members of the public to comment on items that are within the City Council's jurisdiction but not on the agenda. Because of restrictions contained in California law, the City Council may not discuss or act on any item not on the agenda, but may briefly respond to statements made or ask a question for clarification. The mayor may also request a brief response from staff to questions raised during public comment or request that a matter be agendized for a future meeting. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. If you are a member of the public and you wish to address the City Council, please complete a request to speak form available at the entrance and submit it to the City Clerk. You will be called upon at the appropriate time. If you have materials and other items to present to the members of the City Council, please do not approach them. All materials shall be presented to the City Clerk for distribution. Are there any members we do have one here.
Hello, everyone. I think I know everybody on the council.
Good
Nice
afternoon.
to see you. I'm Jeff Hawker with Hawker Productions, and I'm here now at 3 o'clock because the date was changed, and I sing in the Palm Springs Gay Men's Chorus, and tonight is our tech rehearsal for Disney Pride in Concert. So I just wanted to say thank you for consideration for Hawker Productions for the state of the city for the next 2 years. I'm very proud and honored that I would represent the city of Cathedral City. Also, if anything changes, I did put in the RFP for all 3 events. If anything changes, I still would love to be considered. I just want to let you know that also, our company is a PR marketing and I'm an executive producer. So I produce some of the largest events here in the Coachella Valley. In fact, next week is Cinco de Mayo Palm Springs, and I would encourage all of you to come. If you'd like tickets, I'm happy to provide you with them. It's one of the largest block parties in Palm Springs. In fact, we have the Cathedral City Folklorica, Cathedral City High School Folklorica dancers that are going to be part of the event, mariachis from LA and what have you. I also produce the Palm Springs Food and Wine Festival. So in the back of your mind, if you're ever considering doing something for Cathedral City, we could talk about that as well. Also, one of the companies that I represent is Palm Springs Friends of Philharmonic, and we are happy that we are slated for January 26th at the Cathedral City Amphitheater. That event will be free of charge to all residents, and we are bringing in Sinfonio de Minaria from Mexico City, who will be performing at the McCallum the night after that. So this is a real treat for all the citizens of Cathedral City to see an orchestra of this caliber in the amphitheater free of charge.
Free of charge to Cathedral City residents or to anybody?
Free for everybody.
Thank you.
Palm Springs Friends of Philharmonic, fortunately, has done very well. We bring in orchestras to McCallum. Last year we had Israel Philharmonic, London Philharmonic, Chicago, San Diego. And next year is even bigger. So we're very excited. So thank you for your time. Appreciate your support, and have a great day.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah. Any
Take care.
questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment on items not on the agenda? And I see none, Mayor.
We have no closed session items, so we will move to our study session, which is the fiscal year 2025-2026 and 2026-2027 biennial budget presentation for special revenue funds, proprietary funds, and capital improvement projects, the CIP plan, and park improvement program plans. That's a lot.
It is a lot. Thank you, Mayor. This is the next in a series. It seems like, well, we have met every week for about the last 2 months, going over items related to the budget. This one covers all those things you just said. I won't read them again. Kevin Biersack, your Financial Services Director, will present the item.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, City staff. As the City Manager said, 2 months. We started this on February the 19th with these every Wednesday type things, but it dates back, as you all are aware, we start our budget planning in December. So these are the 4 topics: special revenue, proprietary, the Parks Improvement Program Plan, and the Capital Improvement Program Plan. As usual, please ask any questions as we go along or save them to the end. On that note, with respect to Life in the Universe, for our upcoming biennial budget for FY 25-26, 26-27, we have 59 funds that we account for. Ironically, 53 of those are accounted for and budgeted, and they are part of what we have in our annual comprehensive financial report. There are 6 funds that are fiduciary funds. So a fiduciary fund is a fund where we actually do the accounting for, but we are not necessarily liable for. A good example is assessment districts. We account for the assessment districts. They are debt, but they are not city debt. So we don't actually tie back to that from a budgetary standpoint for that debt. So operating funds, 2 weeks ago, we spent time with you all on the general fund, and that included a discussion on our new companion fund, the Measure W fund. This afternoon, the special revenue funds, there's 5 that have operating budgets, the proprietary or internal service funds, and we have 4 of those puppies, and then our capital improvement project plan and our parks improvement program plan. So in total, 40-plus funds are restricted that are non-discretionary, and here is the breakup of those below, whether they're a match fund, a grant fund, the impact fee funds, and you're familiar with the development impact fees, assessment districts, debt, with respect to anything that we need to budget for that's our debt or the capital side of an assessment district.
So can I ask you something about assessment districts?
Yes, sir.
Because you're saying that they don't have a budget, but they often have a spending plan as to what additional money that's not being used for debt or is additional.
And those 6 up top, sir, those are the debt side with respect to it. On the capital side, yes, we budget for those.
Okay, I was a little confused because you said we don't really technically have a budget for assessment districts, but we kind of.
On the debts, only on the
On the
debts,
debt side.
only on the debt side, sir.
Thank you.
So these are the 5 special revenue funds that have operating budgets, and there's a couple slides for each one of these. The Public Education and Government Fund, think of Channel 17, think of CCTV, think of the council chambers that we're in right now. And the revenue that we secure from that comes to us quarterly. It's like a franchise fee. And it's basically 1%. Our franchise fee is 5%. So Spectrum, the old Time Warner, we get 1% in addition to the 5% that we get to our general fund. This fee supports our channel, supports this facility. So in the budget book that you received in mid-March, this is what was identified in the budget book with respect to our 4-year that we identify the past fiscal year, the current fiscal year with budget and actuals, and then the proposed budget for the 2 fiscal years, and the fund balance that we have in this fund.
So that's the part that is missing from the chart, at least in our books, is the beginning and the ending fund balance.
So fund balance,
Where would
we
find
only
it?
compute fund balance once a year, and that is tied to when we do our rolls. So whenever we tie back to a fund balance number, that's where we started the year. And then we will have a computation of the fund balance at the new. This was something that we went ahead and added into the slides that was not part of the, we just felt it would be something good information to be able to provide to you all.
Well, it is good information because, it raises the question on some of these funds because the spending is not even over the years or seem to show a pattern of growth. So that implies, at least to me, that there's some kind of balance that we're at some point not spending all of because we know we have a big expenditure coming up in certain years. but it's hard to kind of analyze it without the fund balance, at least the beginning fund balance.
And you hit the nail on the head, sir. It is the beginning fund balance.
Okay.
So, and in this example of the disparity or the difference between the two, the plan is to be able to make this council chambers better in year one of this budget.
I got you, but I'm not talking just
I
about,
understand, I
just about this
understand.
part of the presentation. There's a number of funds. And
Understand.
we didn't get any information that talked about the beginning fund balance. You're just now putting it on the slides. So can we get that information so when we do our review of the budget, or shall I write it down?
Is this the beginning fund balance?
This is the beginning. This is at the start of the year because we will have a computation at the end of the year. And when you see the proposed budget, you will see balances in the proposed budget for all of the funds.
All right. So just give me a second. When we go slide by slide, I'll write it down since it wasn't included
Okay.
in the information we got.
Understand?
Thank you.
Kevin?
Yes, sir.
Piggyback on that question. Now, can you tell me why the difference between 2024 and 25 and 25, 26 fiscal years is almost double the amount?
That is the enhancements that are planned in year one of the budget, sir. So in year one of this upcoming budget, we have about $150,000 to $175,000 worth of budget planned that the IT folks are going out for RFP on.
Oh, okay.
And Kevin, I can add to it a little bit. So as we've known, and we've had some troubles with this council chambers, with the mics, with the projection of this broadcast. And the appropriate use of these funds is to ensure that public can participate. And so there will be a comprehensive update, updating the screens, updating the microphones, updating some of the back systems, and making sure that when we have public access to our meetings, it's done, and this is budget for that, those upgrades.
Thanks.
And that will come to you because that will be an RFP. That will come to you. Even though we have it identified in the budget, you will approve that at the appropriate time.
And this would include, you were talking about the government access channel? Because there were some, okay, yeah,
It's the enhancements that, yes.
okay, great, good, thank you.
Moving on to gas tax. Gas tax is, when you think of street maintenance and you think of the maintenance aspect of public works, in tradition, most of that work is paid for by two special revenue funds, gas tax and the next, and after these two slides, Measure A. So that is, and we usually call that a 50-50 split because in tradition, most of the activities from a materials standpoint, a supplies standpoint, maintenance and operations, whatever the need is a 50-50 between the Measure A and the gas tax funds. So the first one, the gas tax, is the state gas tax. That's the basic gas tax, not to be confused with the SB1 RMRA 12 cents a gallon that was enacted back in 2017. That's separate. This is the main gas tax. So as you see, that's revenue provided by the state for gasoline that is sold in our city. 11.5 cents of tax revenue in excess of 9 cents per gallon based on the population is their formula. Same kind of information. This was in your budget book, that which is in blue for the 4 years, and we have added the fund balance. So from a gas tax standpoint, traditionally gas tax generally covers maintenance. There is a rarity when we're able to actually use gas tax funds for a capital project, a road improvement project. The last time we were actually able to do that, 6 or 7 years ago when we did Dinah Shore from the Date Palm to the western city limits, a portion of that was funded through gas tax, and that's the last time we've been able to have enough funds for a project. We just don't garner the same kind of revenue in gas tax that we do in Measure A.
When you say from Date Palm to, I'm assuming you mean west, what street is that? Is that going to be?
I'm sorry, Dinah Shore. If I
Dinah
didn't
Shore,
say
okay.
Dinah Shore, my bad. But
right.
Dinah Shore is what we did
Okay.
6 or 7 years
I
ago.
assumed it was, but you know what assuming gets you.
My apologies. So, for anything that was extraordinary from this standpoint, and maybe we should have had this in there from the PEG fund, but we had focused on gas tax Measure A and the environmental fund. What you had in your budget book with respect to the budget book back in mid-March was $25,000 extra per year for medians, curbs, gutters, concrete guardrails, and gates. And then in year one, we have a project for the Cypress Retention Basin project for water removal. And so 50% of that at $65,000 is funded in year one. So these are the extraordinary one-time costs coming from gas tax that are currently being budgeted.
What area of town is Cypress?
Isn't that up in? So like over there south of James Workman?
Yes, south of James Workman, Cypress is Santoral, the inlet is the retention basin, coastal distribution. It follows water, once we get it to open up more, it will drain the street.
All right, thank you. No, I'm just not familiar with that.
And so when you refer to this fiscal year 25, 26, you have 25,000 and 65,000, which does not add up to 85,000.
Oh, you're right, it's 90, my bad.
All right, just,
Thank you.
I would like personally to share
Thank you.
that 5,000 with the council.
You are correct.
Call it a day.
Measure A, the companion piece to gas tax. And this funding is financed through RCTC through 2039 is the latest date, and that's the 0.5% use tax. So when you think of the 7.25% tax that is the state tax, then there's a 0.5% use tax, and then there is our 1.5% use tax on top of that. That's how you get to the 9.25. So this also has a maintenance of effort. Many times when we talk with you all, when we have discussions, we talk about the maintenance of effort that is the general fund maintenance of effort tied to the SB1, the RMRA, the Road Maintenance Rehabilitation Act. This is an MOE that existed long before SB1 came about, and this is actually surprisingly a very small number. And the credit that we get for this MOE doesn't just come from the general fund like the other MOE that you all are familiar with. We actually do an agreed upon procedures audit with RCTC every fall based on the fiscal year end. And tied to that, they are able to go through and identify that which we are able to actually get credit for MOE, and we far exceed the 391,000. As a matter of fact, we're probably in the 3+ million range on, if the world ever fell apart with respect to this topic and we would spend less than 391,000 a year, we kind of have like a reserve out there with the county that we would be able to go against. If we spent 1 year 250, we would have 141 that would be deducted from that reserve.
Is that reserve immemorial? I mean, it's just forever?
Depends on anything, but
I know.
it's never gone, it
Depends on the next
continues,
election.
in the 18 years I've been here, ma'am, it just continues to accumulate, and there's never been a discussion about it going away.
Thank you.
So the same kind of chart that is in your budget book, in this example, we had a fund balance at the end of last year, the start of this year, of almost $1.6 million. So that kind of gave us a starting point with respect to being able to look at what kinds of projects in the upcoming budget cycle. Extraordinary items with respect to, we have a couple of extra ones in here for Measure A because there's traffic signals, the maintenance, the repairs, the call-outs, and any upgrading of the signals. Those are not qualifiable expenses under gas tax. So those are the only kinds of things, and street utilities. Those 4 or 5 items are only able to be paid for by Measure A, or our general fund if we so chose. But they could be paid by Measure A. We're not able to do a 50-50 split on those items with gas tax. So these are the amounts with respect to the extraordinary items for Measure A in the 2 years. Moving on to solid waste, AB 939, the Integrated Waste Management Act. Programs initiating recycling efforts. This is what we've talked about previously with respect to for every dollar that comes in from Burtech, whether it's from the tax roll or direct pay, when the tax roll, I should say, when the tax roll comes in, 12 cents on the dollar comes to the general fund, 12 cents on the dollar comes to our environmental fund, and the other 76 cents goes to BRTAC. So that's the 12%. And you can see our fund balance at the beginning of this year was over 3.2, almost on the verge of 3.3 million. And the same kind of chart. And one of the things that you can see from a go-forward standpoint, you will look at those budgets, and there are some extraordinary items on the next slide. But one of the things to keep in mind, we're becoming smarter with respect to certain kinds of expenditures that maybe in the past we would use general fund dollars for. We're now able to work and collaborate with Deanna Pressgrove and Public Works folks with respect to being able to decompose granite. We're able to now utilize that. Southwest Boulder and Stone, when we buy certain kinds of recycling kinds of stones and things like that, we're able to then use this fund rather than general fund.
Whoever thought recycling would pay us, huh?
Yes, ma'am. And then here as well are the one-time monies that are identified over the next 2 budget years. And then finally, the housing successor. Activities of the low and moderate income housing successor agency. In next week, when you have your last and final Wednesday afternoon on budget type things, and it will be financial services, and we'll do a deeper dive into low and moderate and give you, based on some of the goals that we established 2 years ago, we feel we've done a good job in accomplishing some of those goals and uncovering what actually, and putting our arms around what we have in the low mod housing area. One thing to keep in mind, because of what happened with the dissolution of the old RDA, where there was 80% redevelopment and 20% housing, we do not receive any revenue. There is no revenue generated that comes in the door. And so what you have here is what our 4-year chart looks like. At the beginning of this fiscal year, $2.8+ million in fund balance.
Not shabby.
Moving on to proprietary funds, unless there's any other questions on these 5 operating budgets. So this is more traditional accounting, as we've talked about before, from a standpoint of these are funds that provide goods or services to other city funds or departments on a cost reimbursement basis. So in the general fund, for example, you've seen where we may have an allocation on a monthly or annual basis where we're sending funds from the general fund or Measure A gas tax or AB 939, where we're sending those over to these proprietary funds to pay for traditional kinds of goods and services, like equipment, insurance, technology, and facilities. Those are our 4 proprietary funds that we've identified. These are the balances at the beginning of the year. We think of this more in the sense of a traditional, when you think of an income statement and a balance sheet in traditional accounting, proprietary funds follow a different set of rules than traditional funds do in government fund accounting. Those are the balances. The equipment replacement fund. Departmental capital purchases occurring can capitalize as a result. So departments are charged for their replacement based on what their inventory of equipment is. Equipment is mostly vehicles, but also equipment. Equipment that is capitalizable equipment that is depreciated, whether it's 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, depending upon what it is in our depreciation schedule. So departments are charged for the replacement cost of vehicles or equipment over their estimated useful life, and we use a GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principle, depreciation schedule. So in the budget book, the 1.309 and the 1.285 are the numbers we have identified in the upcoming 2-year budget.
Kevin?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that replacement, or can you add equipment? It's for replacement only?
It's both.
It's both.
It's both. And so and it also ties back to, what we've discussed on previous occasions, sir, with respect to an ambulance, a truck, or an engine, what those cost us 10, 15, 20 years ago versus what they're costing us today. So that's where sometimes, because in some of the lean years back in coming out of the Great Recession, we were not in a position of being able to fund our replacement at the 100% level. The numbers you saw on the previous slide are at the 100% level. And our auditors have even recommended, if you have the bandwidth to include a CPI, that you should fund at a CPI an increase because of just that exact same thing. When you have something that happens 10, 15 years that you bought long ago, it's going to be that much more in the future. But it is both.
So when you replace it, if you sell something, like a fire truck, does it go back into?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
When we
thank you.
go to auction, yes, sir. So in your budget book, in the final two columns, you can see what has been identified, requested by the various departments with respect to their needs for the upcoming 2 years. So we're looking at about $1 million, and we're looking at another $500,000 in year 2.
So I see it differs slightly. It looks like the building inspector truck got moved up a year than what we have in our agenda.
That was an error. We've corrected that error. Because in the budget book, it was actually in year 1, and we don't know how it made it over there.
All right. I'm just pointing out it does differ than what
Yes,
we have.
yes, sir. Oh, how did that happen, Christina? I might need your help. What did I do? I pushed the right button. There we go, and then I'll go up top. Yeah, all the way up top. Oh.
I don't think we were that far down.
Yeah, we're further. If you just give me back, I can continue. There we go.
Here, right?
Yeah.
Waste.
Thank you. Sorry about that. There we go. Any other questions on equipment replacement? Sorry about that interrupt. The insurance fund is the second of our internal service funds. Insurance coverages, employee benefits. So when you think of insurance, you think of internal and you think of external. You think of people and you think of things. We had that. Oh, yeah. Then from the insurance fund, that was the one that's at about $9.9 million, almost $10 million on the header slide at the beginning. And that is the 4-year plan with respect to.
And I'd like to point out on this one, we've had some comments from people in the public who looked at this section in the budget book and said, oh my gosh, we're spending $14 million on insurance for the police department. And the reason the numbers you see here under salary and benefits, there's no employees in this fund, but all of the payments for our health insurance for employees, dental, vision, our payments to PERS for the retirement benefits, all of that goes through this fund. So the money comes in from the departments through their salary and benefits line item into this fund, and then when we make the payments to PERS, they go out of this fund. So that's why you see such large numbers in this fund.
And as a result, you can also see the gradual increase from year to year from a budgetary standpoint.
So if that's what the salaries and benefits portion represents, what is the capital and operating in the insurance fund? What does that represent?
The non-kind of people things because up above it's more of the benefit things to take care of the people. And then down in the operating, the capital, it's more of our property kinds of insurances and those types of things.
So that's where, if we do have a portion that goes to liability, it might be part
Correct.
of that. But it's still not that total. It's got other things like property insurance, fire insurance, that kind of, on your.
In that line, and we'll talk about that next Wednesday with respect to the 11 types of insurances that we have, whether it's through our JPA, through PERMA, or direct through Alliant.
Okay, all right, we'll wait.
But I don't understand why it isn't included in operations then.
It does
And it's the payments, the premium payments for the 11 types of insurance that Kevin mentioned.
You're not including those other things that Mayor Pro Tem has
And-
brought forward.
And also our self-insured retention. In our liability anyway, you know, we have, it's you would call it a deductible. So anything under the 250,000 SIR, we just pay that directly in settling claims.
And we budget for that accordingly too, also in the operating line item.
I got about 80% of that.
The technology fund, it is our third fund. This year, we don't have anything in the budget for you with respect to the biennial budget, but so that you understand how the technology fund is funded, this dates back to the years, and we're young enough or old enough to remember the days of microfiche. So this dates back to microfiche and actually having a fee that is charged to a permit. So when those monies come in to the technology fund. They do not come into the general fund. And so the technology fund accrues those monies. Back in 2017, when we brought it to council and executed the contract for the ERP, for the Enterprise Resource Planning System, that $900,000 was able to be achieved through the technology fund, and it was not an impact to the general fund. So since we started that in 2018, and now that this fiscal year is our final year, we're just finishing up our final costs with respect to that. All of those dollars that we spent over time, and we didn't get to the $900,000, we got into the eights. But that will now be capitalized, and then that will now be depreciated starting next year for the next 10 years. But tied to that, if you go back to the original slide, with the four proprietary funds, we have about $1.5 million in the technology fund. But no budgetary items. If anything would come about, let's say IT would have something that would come up other than what's planned through the PEG, it would come to council for review and approval. And then the facilities fund. You've heard about the facilities fund. There's the facilities division that's part of financial services, and we have a facilities budget from the general fund, but then we also have a facilities fund. In the facilities fund, we have over $6 million or thereabouts, and tied to that, that's where we're targeting our monies with respect to, in the upcoming budget, out of the facilities master plan. We'll talk about that again next week with respect to the 30 items that came from that condition assessment. And there's a significant item in there for the parking structure that needs to be evaluated and determined. And it's about $2.6 million. A few months ago, we brought to you the elevators. And the elevators, that's about $300,000. Both of those are expenditures that are tied back, coming from the facilities fund, but not from the facilities general fund budget. The revenues that do come in are Fire Station 413, the amphitheater, the parking structure. Because we do have some billings with respect to some of our local auto dealers that park in our parking structure, and we bill them on a monthly basis. And there's what was in your budget book with respect to the items. Moving on, the Parks Improvement Program Plan. Basically, there's two categories with respect to when we look at this. We look at what do we need to do from a risk standpoint, AKA the American Disabilities Act, and if we identify any projects that we think are prudent with respect to mitigating risk. And then any park upgrades or new features.
May I just insert?
Yes,
This
ma'am.
goes a little bit off, but I was just at the autism putting together at the, what do they call it's not the zoo, we call it something else. What do we call it? What do we call it? Yeah, Living Desert. And they just went on and on about Cathedral City and how we were early in the certification and how we had the color your spectrum thing at the amphitheater, and we were just the cat's meow. And I was sad I was the only one there to hear the meows. Thank you.
Sweet.
It's a big deal.
So in the Parks Improvement Plan from an ADA standpoint, and ADA would come from the insurance fund, and we budget accordingly from the insurance fund for these kind of projects. Century Park, Dennis Keith Soccer Park, and various with respect to the 4 parks and adding crosswalks and ADA ramps, or path of travel type of activities. So ironically, what you see here is over the 2 years, we're looking at $280,000 planned for each fiscal year for these items. And with the parks improvement projects that we identify, whether they're ADA or not, we collaborate with Public Works and we collaborate with the maintenance manager, who also ties back to parks.
And that just must be a number that you're kind of working with, because not every single place is going to have the exact
Correct.
same number.
It's just a ballpark estimate, because keep in mind, these are plans. We haven't gone out and actually looked and scoped.
I got you, but those people watching, I thought maybe they...
Then from an upgrade standpoint for park improvement projects, for park upgrades, if you'll notice, we have different funding sources identified, whether it's year 1 and year 2. And you might look at it and say, well, Kevin, in year 1, you don't have anything from the general fund. And the reason we don't have anything identified in year 1 from the general fund is because we're moving to DRD. Effective 1 July, and we'd like to be able to tie back to that will be their first year with respect to managing our parks based on the contracts that are being put in place. There will be items that, whether they're under a certain dollar threshold, $10,000 versus over $10,000, and we do have a budget for any big ticket items if they come to us with any over 10,000 expenses. We're trying to present the parks in a good condition when they take over day 1, and then we're looking for their feedback. If they say, well, based on their experience and where they've been, are there different kinds of things that we might need to look at? So that could be from an out year standpoint, whether it's year 2 of this budget or in our future biennial budget. But we do have a few things identified with respect to the downtown dog park, with respect to the design, when that design is completed. Out of one of our impact fees, the parks impact fee, we've identified a bogey of about $400,000 a year potentially with respect to design. And with the Public Works folks at the same time, and our grants analysts looking for potential grant funding and opportunities. So maybe that can kind of be coupled, because right now, beyond the design, if you remember, the concept was to get it design ready so that we would have something to be able to go after. Then there's a couple of little plans potentially out there that are both been identified from the impact fee fund, one of which is a wilderness trail plan, and as well is the potential for parks citywide master plan. So those are just amounts that have been identified in collaboration with Public Works that would be the potential to be able to look at those types of planning activities over the next 2 years. In year 2 of the general fund, the one item that is there is what we tied back to months ago with respect to the potential for a splash pad area when it was originally being discussed out here by the fountain, but then it was decided, no, it'd probably be better to go in a neighborhood. And the one park that maybe could use something like that, from our observation, would be Century Park. So that's a placeholder, some of which that funding could come from AB 939, but the majority of it from the general fund.
And is that why you have the 2 line items?
Yes, ma'am. The 100 line item is for the 400,000, and the AB 939 line item is the 100,000.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Future years on out in this 2-year cycle, but in your budget book, there were some thought processes, and those are just forecasts because we really focus on the first 2 years from a standpoint of ideas with respect to pedestrian lighting for a fitness walking path potentially at the soccer park, recycling water systems if there's a splash pad area tied to Ocotillo Park, and Panorama Park with respect to items such as lighting for the basketball court, for the baseball field, and a splash play area, if there would be any potential for that. So all in all, when you look at the funding profile by fund, the general fund, looking out in 2 years, is about 600,000, 246, AB 939 is a couple 100,000. The development impact fee fund could be upwards to 1.8, almost $2 million. And then the insurance fund that we talked about for the ADA compliant type items. potential for grant funding, and any forecasts out there. So that's the bottom line. Questions? So let's move on to the 5-year capital improvement project plan. We've used a similar type of categorization, and that was in the budget binder in the budget book, and just want to remind you of how we categorize existing projects. These projects are funded, they were approved by you all, and they have budgets. Because keep in mind, with these plans, we don't budget per se for them until they are approved by you. New projects, funding identified with future council approval, and then that would result in a corresponding budget adjustment after you all would approve it. Unfunded projects are a concept, they're an idea with an estimated amount, and we may or may not have funding. We might generically say grant funding vice a specific fund. And then we'd be potentially awaiting on award if there's a grant application involved. The new equation that comes into it is a lot of this now factors in with now into this budget cycle, this biennial budget cycle versus 2 years ago, we actually have a pavement management program, and we have a plan that our Public Works Department is able to utilize to assess. These next 2 slides you saw last week when Mr. Corella did the Public Works budget presentation. The only thing to add to that on the first slide is when you see funding, when we start the initial collaboration with Public Works, we identify for them what our balances are for the respective funds that could potentially be a starting point. And then they will go from there. And now we have the new equation with respect to not only do we have our traditional MOE and our SB1, but we now have the Measure W. And on the next slide, the how and the why with respect to utilizing the PMP and the way that the Public Works folks can then evaluate based on a PCI rating. And then they can, notwithstanding, they can tie back to a side-by-side comparison with respect to that condition. Not much more, was what was discussed last week. This is a bonus slide. You all had a discussion. You gave us, this is not in your packet because this is something that the homework that you gave us, and based on the timing of doing the packet, and collaborating with Charlie and Ann, I asked if this would be appropriate to give you this bonus slide. You asked the question, how are we doing on our MOE? So we looked at both. So ironically, we looked at both the general fund MOE and we looked at our SB1 and what were the trends. And when you look at, for the general fund for these 6 years of 2019 through 2024, meaning June 30th of this past year, our average is there highlighted in the box below at about $730,000. We generically talk about our general fund MOE, we put $1 million budget in for the general fund every year. The actual requirement from the state of California is $905,000, so we just push it up. That's just been our motto since the beginning in time. So that MOE is 905, different from the MOE we talked about 30 minutes ago or so on the Measure A that's 391. So when you look at this, the average shortfall came into being 173,000. You can see we had some good years. We had 2020 and 2023 where we were above. So in looking at this, then what I did not present a slide on because it's all good, over on the SB1 side, we were a little bit higher, not at the 731, but the 6-year average on the SB1 came in at about 774. But in the planning that the Public Works folks have done in years 1 and year 2 of the budget, and you'll see this in a subsequent slide, they're making up for that in year 1 and year 2 to get that 774,000 up above the threshold because they're spending more in year 1 and a little bit less, but still more in year 2. And I'll show you those numbers in a few slides.
So real quickly, this would imply that somehow, like in the last year, we reduced our paving and maintenance, those types of things. Is that the case, or was it we were able to use other funds to do, because this is only telling one little,
This is only
One
telling,
little
this is
piece.
only telling the MOE piece, sir.
right, so like
Correct.
some of these years where the MOE was higher, is it, I mean, would it be fair to say we had additional revenues that were available in those years, and other years where it's lower, maybe we had,
That is fair, but one thing to keep in mind in this last year, when Tropical Storm Hillary hit, we kind of hit the brakes on certain activities because we didn't know where life was going to be financially and based on some of those. So with respect to some of the plans and where we actually came back to you all and tied back to how we wanted to shift and do budget adjustments, and based on that, we backed off and we moved some things that were planned for 2024 out of general fund and moved them over to other funds.
well, and we spent millions of dollars on the Hillary and continue to spend monies, but are those not showing here because they're FEMA reimbursable, or?
They're not showing here because, they're not showing here, this is just the general fund MOE, because we were able to leverage other funding sources. In some cases, we were able to use Measure A to do that. In some cases, we just used the regular general fund, anticipating a FEMA reimbursement. In some cases, we were able to use grant funding. In some cases, we were able to use SB1. So there was much more street work done than the 277 that you see in this
This is-
slide.
That's really what I wanted to point out,
Yes,
or at least get
this is-
clarification on, because
It was that
it would
diversion.
appear we didn't spend that much money when there are all kinds of projects going on, many of them related to the tropical storm, but there were others too.
Yes.
So, okay, thank you.
So to end this slide with, based on that difference, one of the things as a result of the homework assignment that you all had for us 2 weeks ago, then we had a collaboration to do a deeper dive with respect to, okay, how can we try to make up? And if you look at that difference, the 173 gets you over 6 years to $1,038,000. So we looked at where we were spending money elsewhere, and could we divert some of that money elsewhere and move it around? And we have done that, and you'll see that subsequently from a Measure A standpoint. We've taken some Measure A funding that was originally forecasted and moved it out of Measure A and are now moving it up into the general fund. And then, so if you then look at it from an 8-year standpoint, we would and should and will exceed the $905,000 average. So let's talk about, in the budget book, the general fund, existing and new. And something to keep in mind with respect to some of the activities that have been going on with respect to naming conventions and the like. Right now, these naming conventions represent what were in your budget book in mid-March. Through the collaboration with, in coordination with Public Works, these naming conventions will be updated and modified when we come to you May 14th with the proposed budget. So they will be more in line, like with like. Yes, ma'am.
And they will be named. You got a handout that was emailed to you, and now it's on the desk. It's a worksheet that lists all the projects and lists the street names of the ones that are going to be done. So the names that are on that are going to be used everywhere so that it's consistent throughout.
So we'll just do a mapping of what was before and bring it over.
And I did just, I'm looking at the entryway pieces, and I believe that we all agreed that one on the, what would be the north side of 10 was something we wanted for the future. Is there a reason that's not?
Is that one of the 11? Because there's 11, and this is just the first 5. So
I don't know if you put them in the 11, I guess that's what I'm asking you.
So when you go back, I'm just tying back to the original, I believe, staff report when it was approved. There were 11 identified there. And so then we received feedback from the Public Works Department, and these are the first 5 by
And
year.
it's on here. If you look, the very first one is listed Date Palm Drive North. That's it. That's the one on the north side of the freeway. And that, you can see that's in, I believe it looks like year 4 of the plan. Yeah.
Okay. Get you back there, buddy.
You'll learn more next week about Tropical Storm Hillary, but since the question was brought up, and you'll see a Tropical Storm Hillary entry here, we have a biweekly call every 2 weeks, and we had our biweekly call today with respect to our focal point. 4 of our items have made it to what they call the EHP, which is environmental, and they'd been sitting there for a while because of all the work that people have been doing on the Palisades and Altadena fires and those kinds of things. Well, we've had good news today to learn that 2 of our 4 projects have made it to the next level, and that's good news. And one of them is a big ticket item. One of them is the actual debris removal. So that's $2.7, $2.8 million. So we're happy to hear it's made it to at least the next step. Now, how long will it take it for the final 4 steps? I don't know. But we got to crawl before we walk.
We don't know what music's playing.
So I just thought I'd throw that little tidbit in, because that's always a curiosity question about where does life stand. But we'll have more next week on that. Measure W funding, these are the projects that are currently identified. Keep in mind from the budget document what you'll see, and that's why we distinguish in the header. The first 2 columns are proposed. We will throw those numbers in the budget document, but then they will actually be approved by you when we bring the projects forward. The forecasts are just that. They are forecasted numbers because this is a plan. The CIP and the Parks Improvement Project Plan are addendums, attachments to the biennial budget. We do it that way rather than producing 2 separate documents. There are jurisdictions out there that produce 2 separate documents. So the plan is the plan, but we budget for the first 2 columns. Measure A, this is the list of Measure A. With respect to there's a difference in here with respect to what we had previously identified, because we're identifying everything in year 1, and then everything else that we had was really forecasted, but we don't have a handle on what our Measure A funds will be in those out years. So currently, right now, we've taken what was in your budget book in mid-March, and we've identified those, but those projects are unspecified, unfunded until we have more information. SB1 or RMRA, those are the synonymous terms. These are the projects that are listed for the next 5 years. This is the Capital Projects Fund. One of the items that was in the strategic plan was make sure, we already had a Capital Projects Fund, but make sure we utilize it effectively, and we've tightened it up a little bit. But these are all the items that are identified where there's potentially grant funding, whether it's federal, state, could be county, local, whatever. But these are the projects that are out there that are in our Capital Projects Fund, our Fund 331. Sometimes people ask the question, Kevin, what's the Jefferson I-10? If you remember the 6 interchanges that were done years ago, that's the only interchange CVAG has not closed. When CVAG closes that, we'll get a final bill. Will it be $179,000? I highly doubt it. But we have an extra little side area within the 331 fund, and that will just go in there for balancing routines, and we'll be able to use that on other projects once it is unobligated for that.
Now, I had a question about the grants. Are they cyclical? I mean, they're predictable grants that we could count on?
Some, but not, there's cycles. So like, for example, in the Public Works Department, the highway safety, they go back and they apply for different grants, whether it dating back to HSIP 8, 9, 10, 11. If you notice under 11, there's 4 different portions, A, B, C, and D. And that's based on a call. One of the items back on that's in the general fund MOE is the plan to make an investment of about $480,000 and do a design for what could happen to the Ocotillo Square with respect to if there were sidewalks. I mean, above and beyond what was done with respect to the CDBG monies, because that was just a piece. So we're making a $480,000 investment next year. We're looking for a design for that to then be able to apply for, Public Works will then be able to apply for other type of grant opportunities. It'll be a design will make us look like we're ready to run, and like ATP grants. So they'll be able to go after that kind of thing. So there are different cycles tied to certain kind of grants and the application and if you're successful.
But the grants themselves are predictable. In other words, because we have a plan for 5 years to do such and such, but if the grants are unavailable.
If the funding's available, and then they may throw a different kind of grant opportunity out there.
And if I could expand on that just a little bit to your point, Councilmember Lamb, they're predictable in that there will be a call for projects each year on these recurring ones. What is not predictable is whether our projects will be selected for funding or not, because they are competitive. Other than CDBG, which we get an allocation every year, all the other grants are, to a certain extent, competitive. And you know, that's one of the things that some of them go to the RCTC for funding, some of them go to state agencies for funding. What I can tell you is we will have applications in there each time, and we have a track record of doing pretty good on our grant requests, but they're not guaranteed.
And to tie back to what Mr. Carla just said a moment ago, sometimes we have to take into consideration what is the match requirement? Because if the match requirement requires this much versus this much, we need to make sure that we can come to the table with those dollars. So sometimes people tie back to, well, apply for the grant, apply for the grant, apply for the grant. You have to do the analysis to determine, are you going to be able to fulfill the requirements through a corresponding match?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me ask if this is the appropriate spot. There used to be a CIP fund that was for flooding at Los Gatos and Dapalm, and then that was kind of, for a couple of years, been working with CVAG on their project. And now it seems like, well, I see on here in outer years, there's some CIP for Los Gatos to 30th. Doesn't really mention Dapalm from Vistachino to Los Gatos, and it
I'm going to
doesn't
look
really
and see if
talk
there's
about
anything.
flooding.
There's a few grants over here, so I just wanted to look and see.
So my question would be, what happened to that money? Where did it go? And is it get merged into something else? And when is it going to be?
Good question. It did merge because part of our grant with FHWA due to Tropical Storm Hillary on Dapalm Drive, part of that was mitigating that same exact challenge, so that we rolled that into that project.
So is it that implying that it's done, or is
No,
it
it's-
going to be done?
No,
And if so,
when we designed Dapalm Drive, we're obligated part of the grant, and we told them that we would be fixing that, and we put monies in there for it. So we kind of shifted what we saw in a CIP as obligation there. They actually put that in what their grant award was, and so we'll be fixing that drainage problem at Los Gatos Drive.
Okay, so that FHWA project, it doesn't show here as a CIP project.
It's on,
but
let me look over.
Is it,
It's on the previous
what's the
one.
extent of it? Does it go to Los Gatos? Does it go a little farther down?
It goes a couple hundred feet past Los Gatos,
Okay.
exactly where the impact of the storm was, basically the high water mark of, or the
And is
high
that-
mud
Which, of
mark
course,
of
this
the flooding.
flooding area follows the water pattern, so that would make sense. I'm just asking because it seems like some of this is split into multiple projects, and then that project isn't specifically named anymore, and I was just concerned that we don't get a paving project from Vistachino to Los Gatos, and then another one from Los Gatos to 30th, and somehow the drainage didn't get fixed.
And it's
in there.
part of this third line item on this slide.
Yeah,
With respect to Dapalm Tropical Storm Hillary.
and our intention is to bundle both the federal with a city project to continue that down to 30th. Obviously, economy of scale, so, and we're looking at that. But obviously, for the federal grant, you got to keep everything separate, but they do allow you to bundle it as long as you know where the footage started and stopped.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks, John. So above and beyond other types of special revenue funds and/or grant funds, because the 331 is for the typical things like that Caltrans, CVAG, those kinds of grants that we're able to secure for roads. Other types of funds are listed here on the next page. Whether it's the Master Underground Traffic Safety as a match, So that's when I talked about match. That is our match for the HSIP that was on the previous slide. The transfer station for the potential for eventually the truck climbing lane. The current TDA, the two projects with respect to Perez Road Bike Lane and Whispering Palms, and so on and so forth. You'll see CDBG.
What is your ideas on how you're going to fulfill the $6,250,000 on the Edom Hill truck climbing over the 2 years?
Right now, today, we're at over 4 million in that fund.
Okay.
And so that's the transfer station revenue that we receive from the county on a monthly basis.
I just didn't know you had that much.
Because keep in mind, the road going up is in our city, and we get a fee for every time. So take that truck up there and go, and we get a fee every time you go.
All right, we'll line some trucks up.
And then various assessment districts at the bottom. Some of these assessment districts are old assessment districts. They're no longer generating revenue, but based on old bond refundings that were done, we still have a few dollars left, and so that will buy us a few roads here and there. So in summary, with respect to when you look at the forecast for this 5 years, these are the kind of dollars we're looking at by fund number. And I apologize, we have fund number, but if you have any questions, I can tie back to the general fund, and Measure W are at the top, and then the special revenue funds. Then you can see almost down, 2/3 of the way down, 331, that is our capital projects fund, where most of our grants run through. And then our unfunded projects, the list of our unfunded projects.
What would unspecified mean at 3 million?
Unspecified, unfunded, just because I'm sorry, that's the column for the fund, ma'am. So that's where we would have the funding source. And so we just don't have a funding source at this time. But there could be, like, for example, the downtown dog park, we could use some impact fee funds from the parks fund, from the parks impact fee fund. And we could use those dollars coupled with some grant monies. We won't want to deplete that fund, because number one, we don't have enough to make it that industrial strength of a dog park. Once that comes in, the design
We're not
comes
messing
in.
with those funds. Rita's right down there. She'll get us.
So these are what we currently have identified.
Okay.
Questions, answers, discussion.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Appropriate, thank you. So thank you for the presentation. And I know this is helpful. I know this afternoon we were given a map, thank you, and some additional charts. Because, as I think I mentioned in the last meeting, but when people are concerned, they're concerned probably first about police and fire, and of course they appreciate all of the other work that the city does. All of it's important as it works together in the fabric of the city, but probably the next thing I hear the most often is, well, what about roads? When's my road going to get paved? Why'd that road get paved? You know, what's going on with the road money? Those types of things. So that selection of roads to be paved, frankly, in Cathedral City in the past was kind of opaque and hard to decipher. The funding part might not have been that hard to decipher, but when it comes to deciding which roads we're going to get RIAs, and then there's all those layers there. Well, some just need RIAs, and they need it so often for maintenance so that they don't get so bad. Some need reconstructed a little bit. Some need reconstructed down to the gravel or down to the dirt, all of those types of things. So I know that was one of the goals of the council in coming up with the pavement management index, the pavement condition index, those types of things, that would make it a little bit more scientific. But and so I think to a certain degree that it is, but there are still choices that are being made and presented in the budget. So I guess it's a little bit frustrating because it's hard to know what the thought process was that presented one road over the other. So just a real quick looking at this, we got this afternoon. It looks like there were some minor adjustments to some of the sequencing of the roads, is that correct, or? Just the names, okay. So one of my concerns that I had brought up to the city manager was that CVAG is in the process right now of readjusting their traffic project priority schedule. And part of that is in sync with what's going on with the traffic relief plan at Riverside County Transportation Commission and their wish in the future that's been expressed by the commission to try to seek additional funding. Some of that then, if it's like the Measure A type of funding, would flow to the Western County, and they have a whole way they deal with that in the Western County, and some of it would flow to the Coachella Valley, and some of it would flow to Blythe. And each place has a different way that they deal with those funds. In Measure A, there is a certain amount of money that goes to the cities for local roadway, but CVAG is proposed, and it's in the current traffic relief plan in front of the commission, that anything generated from that new funding measure would go to CVAG to use on priority projects. So there has been some consternation about that, and I, of course, have represented, to the best of my ability, the interests of Cathedral City and the Coachella Valley. And CVAG's solution to this point was to propose, but it's not really concrete on what it is so far, but I've been working with them, and I know John Corella has also in his roles there with CVAG Transportation, and that they take on the paving of arterials. So instead of the money flowing to the cities, that CVAG would take on paving of arterials, especially, of course, it's not really been concrete or put in concrete yet, but it's especially arterials that go from one city to the other. The thinking being that if somebody's traveling on the roadway, they should expect a certain level of maintenance of that roadway, no matter what city they're going through. And that's very important for Cathedral City because, frankly, we're a city that people pass through often. So, and we have neighbors that are frankly more wealthy than us. And the way the Measure A tax measure works is they get a portion of that money based on how much sales tax they generate, and then they also get a portion. The formula also includes how many rooftops they have, not population, rooftops. So that favors cities that have part-time residents. They have, frankly, their population numbers full-time population numbers may be low, but they have a lot of rooftops. So if you've ever wondered why cities, especially our neighbors to the east, tend to have a lot of money for paving projects, is because they generate a lot of sales tax through their restaurants and other businesses, and they have a lot of rooftops. And, we generate some sales tax, and we have some rooftops too, but it might surprise you to know that often those cities, like our immediate neighbor, they get about the same amount of money that we get, and sometimes more, from Measure A. And to add to that mix is if in the gated communities, most of the time, the city does not maintain the streets at all. Correct. So many of these same cities that are getting a large amount of money are also not having to maintain the same number of miles of streets as a city like Cathedral City maintains. So it helps explain some of that difference in the abilities of the cities to fund roadway construction. And of course, there's 100 other nuances to all of that too. But the topic of if there is a future funding measure, exactly what the local share, where it would go if there was a local share, is still up to some debate. But it looks like that most of the cities have acquiesced to the CVAG plan to take over the paving of arterials. And again, that has a big asterisk on it because for us, would they be interested in an arterial like Date Palm Road because it doesn't go into other cities? So, that would be something to be argued in the future. I would say 111, Gerald Ford, Dinah Shore, Ramon would pretty much fall into that plan. And then, of course, there's an asterisk as to, well, does that mean they're going to 100% fund it, or would they expect each of the cities to have a contribution level? If you have a major project with CVAG right now on the TPPS, the city is expected to pay 25% of whatever the local share is, and CVAG pays 75%. So I would think, again, this has not been really discussed at that level yet, but I would think that there's probably going to be some proposal in that same range. So with that said, I see that there are some arterials that are proposed for reconstruction here in the next couple of years. And my opinion is, while this is in flux, that maybe that money that's designated for those arterials would be better spent on a road that CVAG isn't probably going to include in their TPPS plan, and not on reconstructing those roads because they may be eligible in a few years to be reconstructed, at least partially by CVAG's money through this new funding measure.
Because like two of the roads that you mentioned, Dinah Shore from Date Palm to the eastern city limit and Gerald Ford to the eastern city limit, both of those are forecasted, I believe, in like years 3 and 4. And
I think they're in year 2, or at least.
I believe 3 and 4 is last I
3 and 4 is a little
seeing.
better because we would probably get a better
Well,
idea.
and that's what the good news of what you said, because
Of what's going on,
if it's forecasted, then it's beyond into a subsequent cycle.
And to that point, I would like to draw your attention to the map, and I'm sorry you didn't have this earlier, but we printed it on a big thing because I think it helps with some of these questions. One thing we did to try to address exactly that item, as well as the uncertainty of Measure A funds after the first 2 years, was we identified some of those projects, even though they're identified for a specific year, as technically unfunded, because we're not going to put the funds that we directly control, Measure W, SB1, or the MOE, towards those projects, in the hope that either something like that comes, or if we're able to do Measure A projects with those. And since they weren't in the first 2 years, that 2 years from now, when we're working on the next budget, then we'll have a lot better information on if something like you're describing is going to happen, or if we're going to be able to get Measure A funds to do those. So you will notice that we identified the Gerald Ford and the Dinah Shore east of Date Palm, both as, even though they're identified in years 3 and 4, as technically unfunded, to identify that. And you can see also the Ocotillo Square neighborhood, because we funded the design, but we're trying to get grants. So technically, until those grants are awarded, that one's a unfunded project, even though we showed the years where the plan indicates that would be when we would like to do those projects, the grant funding, should it be available. And we even, the Maravilla bike lane that's on your agenda later tonight to authorize the application for, we showed that as a unfunded year 1 project, or year 3, because until we actually get the grant awarded, that one's not technically funded either. So what we tried to do was better differentiate between what we're using our more or less guaranteed, for lack of a better word, funds, Measure W, MOE, and SB1, and grants that have already been awarded. Those are shown in the solid lines, and the other ones where there's going to have to be decisions made, whether we're even able to do it at all, but pending some of those decisions like you described are shown as that way. So I think you will see in looking at this that in our neighborhood streets, you're more, other than the Ocotillo Square, which we're going to try to get grants for, you'll more likely see in the neighborhoods the solid lines, which indicates we're putting those monies that we have more control over, I guess you could say, into those projects. And so I think you and your constituents are going to be better able to count on the ones that are on here in the solid lines in those years. So,
Well, at least in the green and the purple in the first couple of years, because the rest of them there'll be budget decisions made.
well, right. The green and the purple are the ones in the first 2 years are the ones that are actually going to be appropriated in the current year's budget.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, that makes more sense. So hopefully we'll keep an eye on that because many things could happen. There may be a change in how CVAG unveils that plan. There could be a holdup at Riverside County Transportation Commission. They could present something to the voters for funding and the voters could reject it. Or there may be a timing issue as there was before because there was talk of submitting something before and there was a timing issue. So, at some point, it's good to identify roads that are going to need to be worked on. I just wanted to make sure that we the whole council, and I know staff to a certain degree at least, is aware of some of those things that are working outside of our city when it comes to road funding, so that we can keep those in mind and not necessarily do a project and then find out, well, in a couple of years, CVAG was going to redo that roadway anyways. I'm sure they would be happy to have a better reconstructed roadway because they would probably have to do RIAs on our sections and maybe reconstruct somebody else's sections. But I think because we have so many streets that are in need of repair, it doesn't make sense to necessarily to do somewhere we have an alternative. But just like if we had a possibility of a grant and we didn't wait to see if we got it and we spent general fund money on a roadway and then find out we could have gotten a grant on it, well, it's all public money in the one sense, but we have control over very little of it and we have a great need. So it makes sense to try to use a little discernment in how that plays out. So my other question always just has to do with, where you do have a decision here that a road's going to be reconstructed, but it's in a neighborhood with many other roads in similar condition. What exactly is the process to determine which road comes first?
John, why don't you
That's
answer
where,
that?
That's where Public Works would come into
And
play.
there's one in the very first year that's a good example of that, because in Panorama, I think it's, what's that bottom street?
Durango.
Durango.
That is
shown on
we
there.
didn't talk about that directly
Yeah.
when I met with
Yeah.
you, but when I see it here on the map, it certainly is a street in bad condition, but it's one of a dozen that are similar of age and probably use. So my question, I guess, because people will ask, because there are, as we discussed before, unfortunately, there are winners and losers when it comes to these roads. And that one is proposed to be done early, and then there's some other ones in the outer years, and then there's many that are similarly situated that don't even show up on here, which goes out to 2030.
So there's a twofold process. In one, we already know that the streets that we've repaved in the last 5 to 7 years, we're looking to save them and we'll apply a treatment to that. When it comes to total reconstruction, we look at the streets in the PCI, and we've utilized basically PCI for over 10 years now. But now we had a professional plan done, and it's in a program that basically tells you what the PCI is in there, and we update it monthly with new projects that we put in there, and it spits out the new formulations and recommended treatments. When it's coming down to what you're exactly talking about, what differentiates it, on that one, I can tell you there's 2 factors. One is, what's the PCI? It's probably the same as the 3 streets above it, but it was a little longer, and we said we could stretch our money to do that, and that was a good starting point. Unfortunately, those are hard decisions to make, and so we look at it as doing things more in a series, whether it's going up and down. If you look in, I think it's year 2, or the same year, we have 2 streets that we start on top. I can't recall the streets, but
Panorama.
You have Tachiva
Panorama and
eventually,
Los Gatos.
which is which is really the through street. That's in some fire.
no, I actually have
other
a
years.
picture of it here, so.
That's for
there we go.
28, 29. So that one certainly makes sense to anybody that is in that neighborhood. But like I
These
said-
streets right here, if you see on the screen.
Right.
And that is Tortuga and
Concepcion right there.
Concepcion. All those streets in a line are pretty much the same. They're not in the best condition, but we're looking at a series and you got to make a choice somewhere, and we basically started from the top and we're working our way down on the treatment.
But you are
on
using
those.
your PCI, and say a street like Tortuga, I don't know if you take this into consideration. I mean, that makes sense because it actually exits on one side out to Date Palm, and it exits the other side out onto Landau, where many of the other ones end at La Vista and La Paz. So that's more of a through street, I guess you could say.
It can, but if the PCI on the other streets are even worse than that, we'll take a harder look at it.
Right.
There shouldn't be a discount if they're letting out traffic or anything. But what we traditionally see is what you're stating, the streets that do let out to major streets, they wear out a little faster. And so we know the degradation on that will increase significantly more than other ones that are cul-de-sacs and things like that. So you could probably push the cul-de-sac, not to offend any cul-de-sac people, but there's hard decisions to make. And sometimes you got an apple and it's say, how do we make this a logical series then?
Okay, so you're not, well, I'll ask you, are you basing it on if people call and complain, those types of things?
People call and complain. In fact, I have a lot of people call and complain about the streets. We note them, but we're still going in that same order.
You still use a scientific, more of a method than you, or at least a scientific method with a structured plan. It's not just people that call and complain.
Correct. And just an example, I had someone on the street right below this on Hermosillo. And he said, when's my street being done? And I looked at the PCI on the two above it, and I knew that they were a little worse than that street. And I just said, unfortunately, the two streets above you, their PCI is this, yours is this. It's not in this cycle, but it's something that we probably might look at the next one. I don't give them any promises.
Right.
But the beauty of the PCI that we invested in, the pavement management program, is it eliminates that decision and that working with people on basically, if I complain a lot, I'm going to get something done.
All right. Well, I encourage that because, there's always rumors out there. People are trying to figure out why, and they don't want to believe that it's scientific, so they'll say, oh, it's because they complain or they know somebody and those types of things. And I am hoping that that's not occurring, that we're using a very professional, well thought out and scientifically based decision-making model when we do these, so that everyone can feel assured that even though their roadway may not be on this plan right now, that their roadway is being evaluated the same way fairly as everyone else. It's not just based on somebody complaining or somebody knowing somebody.
Correct. And obviously, if there's funding in there, an assessment district, it has a different take on it.
There are
and
so many
different
nuances when it
grants
comes
and
to
things like
that, or if
yeah.
it needs re-res, or if it needs a total reconstruction, and yes, those types of things. Or if they're in a CDBG area, they may, even though that's limited funding. So I do understand all that, but when it comes down to apples on some of these, you do have to make a decision. So I'm just trying to make sure that everyone feels assured that that's being done in some type of, objective, scientific, structured way.
And one other thing we've provided, or two other things, council members, that may be useful to you when you're considering this and talking with constituents. On the map that we were just looking at, the ones that have the cross hatches on it are all of our private streets that we're not responsible for maintaining. So you can back those out of the equation right there. And then we also provided a map, which is the very last one in your packet, that is all the projects that have been done since, was it 2017 to now, John?
2015 to
2015
now.
to now, so the last 10 years. So when you back out the private streets and then look at the ones that have been done in the last 10 years, and then look at these planned for the next 5 years, then the number that don't show up on any of those lists gets a lot smaller.
Yes, I'm going to say that makes sense. It does make the ones that don't show up on either map, wonder when their turn is going to come. I also heard, Kevin, you say something about the Measure A for out in the future years. It's not really budgeted in here. So does that mean that there could be, as Measure A funds become available, or there could be additional roadway segments added to this?
There could be, sir. And from a standpoint of Measure A, along with gas tax, the first priority is maintenance. And so given the fact that the budget, the dollars that we receive, and we budget, we do a 5-year plan with our CTC every year as well, but it's erratic. And when you tie back to the half cent, you would think that the half cent use tax, we would be able to draw a parallel to the same use tax that we receive that comes in on whether it's our 1% or now or 1.5%. And you can't, because number one, our CTC, they take out their overhead with respect to running their program first. So anything that's attributed to our half cent sales tax of that within our city, they take out their overhead. And you would be surprised, because we've even tried to do correlations between our old 1% and what we get done on a monthly basis for our CTC, and you would think, would it be consistent? And it's not.
Right. Well, and like
But-
I say, there's a formulaic piece
There is.
to that too. Well, in fact, frankly, some of theirs goes towards public transit also, and then of their Measure A funds, and then it gets that formulaic, and that's where I was talking about how some of the cities, there are winners and losers when it comes to some of the cities, even here in the Coachella Valley under the Measure
And
A
the same
fund.
thing could be said for gas tax. Maybe not in the next 2-year cycle, but maybe in 4 years from now. Because keep in mind, when I mentioned that gas tax was last used 6 or 7 years ago when we did Dinah Shore from Date Palm to the western city limit to the bridge, and we used a portion of gas tax, with our gas tax numbers and our cost, there's the potential that we might end up with, maybe call it in 4 or 5 years, we're at 125 now, we might be at $500,000 of cash in the bank, reserves. And so maybe given a cycle, we would be able to use some gas tax dollars as part of a match or whatever. So
And Kevin, can you explain to them how over the last, I don't know,
8
8 years
years?
or whatever, we've
Yes,
been
sir.
gradually shifting our personnel costs to the general fund so that more money in Measure A and gas tax is available for road projects?
So measuring gas tax, back to what we do with respect to when you think of the public maintenance folks over the yard, that's the 50-50 ratio. When you think of the engineering folks downstairs, you tie back to, this is now our 4th budget cycle, back to what the city manager brought up. It's our 4th budget cycle. 6 years ago, we budgeted our engineering people at 60% 60% Measure A gas tax, or 30-30, and 40% general fund. Every 2-year cycle, we've been weaning the engineering folks off of that by bringing it down by a 10% amount. So we were at 60-40, then 2 years later, 50-50. 2 years ago, we were at 40-60. This year, we've budgeted 30-70, so that only 30% of our engineering staff that are, not all of the engineering staff, but of the engineering staff, the engineers, tying back to them being funded more by the general fund. So that will help us do more street types of things. Not just repairs and maintenance, but hopefully that will help us build up some reserves, both in gas tax and Measure A, so that whether it's in 2 years from now or 4 years from now, and our intent 2 years from now is if we're at 30-70 now, in 2 years we'll be at 20-80. So that we would only be at 20% for Measure A and gas tax and have more of those dollars go toward our streets.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that and for going through this process, and thank you again to Public Works for making sure that everything is laid out fairly when they make these decisions and continuing to do their best to get as many roads done and done in the right way as possible.
This is your policy document, and we are here every 2 years to do the best we can from a budgeting standpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, do other council members have questions, comments you'd like to make at this time? Then, this was for, oh, do we have any members of the public who'd like to speak on this?
Mayor Ross, I did receive one comment for the record. It was received for the record, provided to the council, and made available for public inspection at the entrance. David Coslow asked 4 questions related to the city's CIP Park Improvement Program. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment? I see no other comments, Mayor.
Thank you so very much. This was for presentation only. There's no formal action required, and we will recess council until 5:30 PM.
Thank you.